everyone, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're going to bring you the how to play video for the two-player game Winds of Fortune by Brian Mosley and published by Safehaven Games. Winds of Fortune is a standalone product. It includes two decks that are pre-built and ready to play. Other cards are included in the base game for the purposes of building your own more varied decks, but for now we'll just focus on the pre-built decks included in the game. First, let's go over the different types of cards you're going to be seeing in the game. Ship and monster cards represent the various naval beasts and vessels that form the core of a player's fleet. They are played from a player's hand into the spaces labeled long range on the player's game board. Upgrade cards represent improvements to the sails, crew, monsters, guns, hull, etc. Upgrades remain on the ship or monster they were played until that ship or monster is destroyed. Location cards represent ports of call, shipyards, and similar locations used by a faction to service their ships, replenish their supplies, and defend their position. Location cards are played onto any unoccupied location space on that player's game board. Effect cards represent maneuvers, tactics, weather conditions, or special abilities. Effects are played from a player's hand and usually are discarded immediately afterward. However, some do remain in play and affect the board state until their discard condition is met. Now that we've taken a look at the different cards in the game, let's look at what you'll commonly find on the card itself. Obviously, you have the artwork of the card. The cost of the card is represented by this symbol right here. The name of the card is located here, and just beneath is the type of the card. This star symbol represents the strength of the card. Strength determines the amount of damage dealt in combat. The heart symbol represents the health of the card. This is the amount of damage that can be absorbed in combat. The arrow symbol represents initiative, which determines the order of attacks in combat. Any special abilities are found here at the bottom of the card. Some cards will refer to either demoralize or inspire, such as this one right here. If a card tells you to add demoralize or inspire to another card, take one of these tokens for demoralize or this side for inspire and place it on the indicated card with the appropriate side facing up. Demoralize gives a unit -1 strength, and Inspire gives a unit +1 strength. A flagship may not receive Demoralize or Inspire tokens. If a flagship were to receive Demoralize tokens, it instead receives that in actual physical damage. Now let's take a look at the game board itself. Each player board has 3 firing lanes. Firing lanes determine which ships are in a position to block incoming attacks. This also determines which section of the flagship the attacker can attack. Ships may only be declared blockers if they are in the same firing lane as the attacking ship. On the board you have long range, medium range, and short range firing bands. Range bands determine if a ship is within range to attack. Unless otherwise noted on the card, a ship may only attack from the medium and short range bands. Each player board also has 3 location spaces. Location spaces are where location cards will be played. They are considered adjacent to the corresponding firing lane. Ships may move in and out of a location space just as if they were moving onto a new firing lane space. The Treasury is where players keep their unspent doubloons. This section right here, known as the stash, is where players should keep doubloons that they have already spent this turn. At the bottom of the player board, you'll find the bow, hull, and aft spaces belonging to your flagship. And in those spaces, you will place the corresponding cards for bow, hull, and aft for each piece of the flagship you've chosen. Each flagship is made up of 3 parts, and each part grants a player a special ability that may be activated once per turn during that player's deployment phase. Players may mix and match these components However, if playing with the 2 starter decks, players will find a pre-built flagship already included with the deck. In a casual game, the last player to sail the high seas will be the first player. However, if neither player has sailed the high seas, or if you're playing a more serious, possibly competition style game, or if you just want a more randomized setup, flip a doubloon, call heads or tails, and that will determine who the first player is. Next, players place the game boards so that each of the firing lanes lines up. Place the doubloons, the damage tokens, and the inspired demoralized tokens within reach of both players. Players will then shuffle their decks thoroughly and place them in their play areas. Players then place a single doubloon in their spent doubloon stash. Finally, players will draw 5 cards for the first player and 6 cards for the second player. Players can take a mulligan if they wish by shuffling in any number of cards from their hand back into the deck and then redrawing back up to the appropriate number of cards. Players are only allowed to mulligan their starting hand and can only mulligan once a game. A player turn consists of 4 different phases: preparation, refresh, deployment, and action. In the preparation phase, the active player first draws 1 card from the top of his deck, then he's going to take a doubloon from the game supply and place it into his treasury, or after he draws that first card, he can discard 1 card from his hand to draw a second card. Also, while making this decision, keep in mind that the active player at any point during his turn can spend 3 doubloons to draw an additional card once per turn. In the refresh phase, the active player takes any doubloons in her spent doubloon stash and moves them to the treasury. These doubloons are now available to be used to purchase cards. She also will refresh any friendly cards that are depleted. In the deployment phase, the active player may play cards from her hand to the board by spending the appropriate amount of doubloons. To purchase a card, the player will move the appropriate amount of doubloons to the spent doubloon stash and then play the card in the appropriate space. Ship cards are always played into the long-range band. Ships may not attack on the turn they are deployed, however they may still move or block. Upgrades are played directly onto the ship or monster they are affecting. A card may only have 1 of a particular upgrade but may have any number of total upgrades. For instance, the floating fortress may not have 2 defensive strategists attached to it. Ships may use their movement to move directly onto a location in an adjacent location space. Ships may only do this for location spaces containing location cards. Ships on location spaces may not attack the enemy flagship, but instead may target enemy locations. An attack on a location may only be blocked by a ship on that same location. Each section of a player's flagship has a special ability. This ability may be used only once a turn and only during the player's deployment phase. These are powerful abilities that can often change the course of the game, so the decision on which cards you use to construct your flagship is an important decision. Effect cards may be used during the deployment phase, however they're different than other cards that we've talked about so far, in that a player can use them at any point during the game to include the other player's turn. Some effects will remain in play, but otherwise they are discarded immediately. During the action phase, the active player attempts to destroy his opponent's flagship by attacking with his ships or monsters. The action phase consists of 6 steps which must be followed in order, though you don't necessarily have to perform every step. Ships and monsters are activated one at a time, and their entire activation must be resolved before moving on to the next ship or monster. The first step is the Activate Ship step. In this step, the active player will simply choose which undepleted ship or monster they will activate. Step 2 is to declare a target. The active player declares she is attacking with a ship or monster. So in this case, let's say she declares the Inquisitor is going to attack. The Inquisitor must be within range of the flagship section in his firing line. And the Inquisitor is a medium-range ship and is in short range and therefore has line of sight to the aft section of the opposing player. Note that a player may only target the opponent's flagship unless otherwise stated by a card effect. The next step belongs to the defending player. The defending player will declare a blocker if she chooses. To declare a blocker, the defending player must choose a friendly ship or monster that is both ready and in the same firing lane as the attacking ship. So if the Inquisitor was attacking, the Sea Golem could be chosen as a blocker. Range has no effect on blockers. Next, both players will resolve the attack. If no blocker was declared, then the target of the attack will receive the damage. If the total damage the target has received is equal to or greater than its health, then the target is destroyed. If a flagship section is ever destroyed, flip it upside down to indicate that it's no longer in use. If the target of the attack was a flagship section which has already been destroyed, then the attack hits the section adjacent to the target. If there are two possible targets next to a destroyed section of the ship, then the target with the highest health would become the valid target. If the targets have the same health, then the attacking player gets to choose. Note that in the case of an adjacent section being targeted, defenders must still be chosen from the original line of fire. So if this section of the ship were chosen as the target, even though one of these sections will take the damage, the floating fortress is still the only valid blocker in that line of fire. So far we've covered what happens if no blocker was declared, but what if there is a blocker? If a blocker was declared, both players compare the initiative of their cards and then resolve their attacks in descending order. So in a battle where both cards have the same initiative, they'll deal damage at the same time. So in this case, both cards will receive 4 damage simultaneously since they have the same initiative. In this case, the ship with the highest initiative will compare its strength to the opposing ship's health first. If its strength is equal to or higher than the opposing ship's health, the opposing ship is destroyed. If it is destroyed, then immediately discard the ship and any upgrades attached to it. So for instance, this has an initiative of 2. This has an initiative of 1. So first, the Inquisitor will compare its strength of 4 to the strength of 7 of the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman is going to survive. And so at this point, the Flying Dutchman will then compare his strength, because he's still alive, to the Inquisitor. And his strength of 3 also does not kill the Inquisitor with his strength of 5, or with his health of 5. Even if the blocking ship is destroyed and its health did not equal the total strength that was used to destroy it, it still absorbs the entire attack and the target of the attack receives no damage. The 5th step of the action phase is to deplete any ship involved in the attack. Depleted ships may not be activated or used as blockers. The final step of the action phase is to move the ship. A ship may move orthogonally adjacent 1 space. When all 3 sections of a player's flagship are destroyed, that player has lost and his opponent has won. There are additional rules included in the rulebook for constructing your own decks with the included additional cards, as well as the rules for competitive play and a 4-player game. However, I'll leave you to find those rules on your own. So there you have it. Those are all the rules for Winds of Fortune from Brian Mosley and Safehaven Games. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you like my channel, please subscribe. And until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.